All right, welcome to another episode of Talking Impact. Today we have a dear friend and partner of Impact Society, Joni Avram, who has had an amazing career in law, politics, charity, marketing, really all with the clear value and intent to contend in the court of public opinion and to really make sure that there's a data-driven approach to addressing underlying causes, not just symptoms in our world. She's worked with politicians, government, not-for-profit, and for-profit organizations through her work at Cause and Effect to really get to the cause of these core issues and to not just check boxes, but to address issues, starting with the underlying issues. Joni can be found online. LinkedIn is a great place to follow her. Joni Avram, that's all you need to know. And you can find her on most social media platforms as a thought leader and an amazing human when it comes to helping ideas stick and really helping organizations understand what's the underlying value that we want to make a change about and then going about the work versus the other way around. Welcome to Talking Impact, your go-to podcast for exploring the powerful connection between mental health, education, and resilient youth. Join us as we uncover insights and stories that inspire classrooms, stronger minds, brighter futures, and a lasting impact in our society.
Thinking about that too, and I think it has to do with the teaching part of it, being able to, like, I wore my little dandelion shirt today because I feel like the teaching is a process of growing dandelions and spreading the word and the seed through the world and helping people who really do want to do this work well do it better. And I think that, I guess, at this stage is it's probably the most fun and rewarding. I also like working on individual projects and consulting work on specific issues, but being able to kind of speak into and train up a generation is pretty cool. And yeah.
Very cool. I think we're rolling.
Oh, are we?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I love a good rolling start.
Okay.
On that note, because you've done so much, like you teach in university, business programs, background in behavioral science, law, politics, awareness campaigns, and you worked with Impact Society from 2007 to 2012. Joni, can you kind of just give us the kind of the background on your purpose, your strengths, and kind of that, what's the through line on the big variety of significant work that you've done throughout your career?
Well, I went to law school never intending to practice law, always believing and wanting in my own head. I wanted to work in the public policy space. I was really interested in public engagement and communication and taking the complexity of a policy and trying to simplify complexity in a way that a public could understand and engage with. I just felt like I kind of had my wiring was that way. I was pretty creative as a kid and I like to tell stories, and I was a little too creative, I think, for the law field because it's a bit rigid. And so and I've always said since I graduated, I said I wanted to work in the court of public opinion. And so rather than making my case before a judge, I make my case before the whole wide world and help and persuade them. And all of the things that I've done, like the education isn't wasted, it's applied, just in a different arena. And to me, it's, I guess the through line is the desire to really positively change things and make help people flourish as a community, as individuals. And I often think about, like, why did I start out in life as a kind of a more of an optimist and an idealist than a cynic? And I think it has to do with, I grew up in a small prairie town in Saskatchewan, and it was less than 2,000 people. And I noticed, even back then, I was probably less than 10 years old. My dad was the mayor, and I noticed that when there were problems or challenges, people got together to solve them. It never occurred to me that that wouldn't apply on a larger scale. And so I don't know if I'm naive or optimistic or whatever, but it's never occurred to me to believe otherwise.
Yeah. And I think often like that's where social movements happen. It's individuals, yes, that then are able to create a ripple effect to inspire others to be a part of it. And we've worked on political campaigns as well, with Bill Smith here in Calgary for mayor, a few years ago,
Yeah.
as well as with Impact Society in 2007 to 2012. Where, maybe bring us back to the Impact Society, how you found out about the organization, what drew you to it, and how you kind of utilized that passion to, be active in the court of public opinion to inspire youth through the Heroes programs.
So it was one of the earliest projects or clients that I got after I started. I had worked in a whole variety of jobs, mostly in the agency world. And so when I put my own shingle out, you guys found me actually, and Jeff Sturzik was the COO at the time, and we had known each other. We had similar background back in Saskatchewan, and I guess through the grapevine, he just contacted me and said, "Would you be interested in helping us out?" And so my first response to that was, "Let's take a look at what they've got. What are they saying about themselves?" And I found this is not unusual, but I found myself not understanding
Mhm.
what Impact was doing,
Yeah.
and they weren't clearly articulating the value that they bring
Mhm.
to the world. And it's not an uncommon problem for not-for-profits as well as for-profit organizations to kind of get lost in the weeds or to think that they're clear when they're not. And so I guess I was inspired by the challenge and the opportunity. I loved Jack, and I liked what you guys were up to, and I thought it would be an interesting exercise in sort of trying to um, figure out the puzzle of
Mhm.
what it is, this thing called Impact Society, and what's it doing, and how do we articulate it better. So it was a bit of a it was really my one of my early efforts in doing this work.
And so what did you find? How did you kind of take this very, diverse, skill set, of Impact Society and bring it into something that could resonate with, the public and with those outside of the organization that had the need but weren't able to see clearly what Impact Society was doing that could help support that need?
Mhm. So a part of it was the luxury of time. When you have a little bit more time to kind of dig into an organization, understand it, talk to the people the users, the funders, the founders, and get a real sense of the story and the arc and the reason. Like, what problem were you solving in the first place? How do you do things differently? Why do you do things differently? Not just we do things differently. Okay, so why do you do it and how do you do it? And sort of tracking that and starting to put it's almost like you're scaffolding. It's kind of like reverse engineering. You're kind of building the story because a lot of times organizations like this start there, they see a problem, they fix the problem, but they haven't necessarily articulated all the
Yeah.
pieces
Yeah.
of the puzzle. And so I think that was a big part of it, listening to the students saying things like before Impact Society this and after Impact Society that.
Mhm.
One of the ones that stands out for me was a teen, maybe grade 12, and he said, before I was a young offender and after I was the president of my student body.
Wow.
And that's a pretty remarkable thing. And we actually, when you tell that kind of story to a funder, well, that's an easy thing to understand the difference between what you're doing. I think one of the phrases I came up with early was this idea of putting the you in youth.
Mhm.
And what does that mean? Well, it's the kind of prevailing message around Impact Society at the time was like youth development.
Mhm.
And when you talk about youth development, it's kind of a vague term.
Mhm.
And it lands differently than when you say, we're putting the you in youth. What does that mean? Well, you can kind of instantly, like, you don't have to think a lot about what that means. It's easy to get the fact that you're talking about the individual strength of somebody and the impact the larger impact of knowing who you are and living that out.
Right.
So it's kind of like being able to elegantly wrap up a story
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
organizations because it can be really convoluted, and it's not just an elevator pitch. It's more about understanding like the essence of an organization, like what's your DNA, what makes you tick, what do people who fund you and follow you and support you value about your work? What do the internal folks value about your work? What do they see? Like I worked with the Alex around the same time, maybe a little bit later, and the Alex was in the same position where they were doing great stuff, but they didn't quite know why they were having such an impact or how to talk about it. And when it came down to helping them kind of dissect their own brand and their own DNA, it had to do with the fact that they weren't just compassionate, which they were, but they were also smart.
Yeah.
And so it was their smart solutions to social problems that really drew people in. And when they started to understand that, and even their own clients were saying that about them, I can do in a month here what I could do in a month here, what would take me maybe 6 months to do somewhere else. That's empowering to an audience or to a organization to hear. And once they hear that and they can articulate it and kind of internalize it, then what happens is people become bolder in how they speak. And this is the thing I don't think people understand. It's not just about content and having like, a cadence or a schedule or being out there at the right time and algorithms and all that. It's about understanding yourself, understanding your context and what you're actually achieving. And knowing those two things makes you bold and able to speak in a way that kind of unconsciously lands with people differently. People have more confidence and trust in you. And as a result, you're going to grow, more likely to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you're just out there saying, oh, we want to help, or we're passionate about this cause, or we want to see this change in the world, but you're doing so in a way that doesn't really say what it is that you're doing and why you're unique, it's easy to have that messaging either get lost in the mix or be misguided. How do you help organizations, and maybe Impact Society is an example, but also interested in talking about Moments Matter, which we took part in as a team, to kind of get under the noise and really get that essential message and then build up from there?
I think that one of the challenges that the not-for-profit space has is talking too much about the problem and not enough about the solution. And I think I often frame it as a tension between fundraising and, let's call it, marketing. Because the fundraisers just want to ring the bell and sound the alarm and say, this is a huge problem. Now more than ever, we need your help. And 97%, it's about framing the problem, which can get people anxious and make them go, wow, we really need to do something about this. And that's kind of one part of the equation. I do think that there's space for that, but I'm not sure that I would necessarily make that the public message. I think the public message has to be about, yes, there's this problem and here's how we're solving it. And we're solving it in very robust and in ways that we can prove.
Yes.
Not so much that we're making a difference, which is a vague term, or we're reaching X number of people, or we're delivering X number of programs, but we're actually, these programs are delivering this kind of outcome.
Yeah.
And people want to put their money where it counts. So I think, to me, that is really the why in the road. Is that the right phrase?
Yeah, I think so.
Or you can choose to focus on need, or you can choose to focus on solutions. And that's harder. It's really harder. And I think that's partly why people maybe shrink back from it, because I don't want to be held accountable for outcomes. That's hard. It's hard to measure them. It's hard to achieve them. What if it doesn't work?
Yeah.
And I am, again, this comes back to my naivete or my optimism. Is I really believe it's possible. And it's possible not in 4 generations, but in it can actually turn really quickly. If we just understand context, people, human behavior, and work with those natural inclinations of humanity rather than against them.
Yeah.
We could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like human nature is a big one, and I think that ties to the individual question around framing people as heroes and not as villains, but also the broader piece in terms of something you said there about we don't want to be accountable, or we just want to talk about our reach, the nice to haves, and how good it feels to do the work we do versus what we're proving. What do
Yeah.
you think? Do you think that some organizations or some campaigns are doing a disservice to the public or to the audience, or taking oxygen out of the room, if you will, when they're going out there without an evidence-based and clearly articulated problem and how they're solving it?
Yes. I mean, I want to be gracious,
Yes.
and I know that people, a lot of folks in this space work directly with people, um, one on one. They see the challenges every day, and so they're often just focused on delivering and meeting just essential needs often, and I get that. And so that's why folks like us, who can kind of take a step back and maybe have a little more luxury of time, and maybe not being so inundated with the busy work of
Outside
meeting
the fishbowl too,
outside
right?
the fishbowl, and sort of taking a step back and going, what's really going on here, and let's understand the causes of things. What are the root causes, and what is the our theory of change is a typical phrase that's used in this space, but how do we understand how A plus B equals C?
Mhm.
And I think that it's just a reality that skill set isn't as commonplace in this space as maybe in other spaces. And as a result, well-meaning initiatives
Right.
get built and get executed,
Yeah.
but sometimes and often
Yeah.
don't create the outcomes that we're hoping for.
I got a good segue here, but I want to kind of articulate the idea that especially here at at Impact Society, when we're looking at the root problem as well as the solution, we like to make sure that we're very clear on what are the core issues, and then being able to juxtapose us versus what's the common thing out there. And we
Mhm.
all want to, the idea of removing risk. So we're risk navigation. The idea of prevention. Oh, we want to prevent drug use. We want to prevent addiction. We want to prevent homelessness. We want to prevent lives that are you know kind of lived in quiet desperation, if you will. And we position ourselves as, well, we're about risk navigation. We have risk every day we wake up. And to just say no often is the hardest way to actually go about having a large scale change. And we're here to create a large scale change by equipping every student with the ability to navigate risk from their internal strengths, their value systems, their support system, and a purpose that they're aligning with, a bigger yes rather than a bunch of no's.
Mhm.
We took part in the Moments Matter campaign that you developed about sexual harassment, which is a very important topic, especially in corporate culture. I think you kind of developed that just around the same time as the Me Too movement and a lot
A
of
little
kind
bit
of
after.
public awareness about how bad this problem is and how prevalent it can be. And I think that's a great example of what you were just saying about starting with what are the core issues here? And
Yeah.
it's not just about saying, oh, we don't like that and we
Yeah.
want less of it. So let's make sure we have team meetings and an awareness campaign in our corporation to stop that.
Yeah.
But you took a totally different approach that really rhymed with a lot of the way we do things with the Heroes programs. Maybe you
Mhm.
talk us through that campaign, because I thought it was absolutely brilliant and how you really got to the core of the issue.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think typically happens in this space is that there's a faulty assumption about, let's call it cause and effect, or how to solve problems. And in the sexual space around sexual harassment, we have spent 40 years, or maybe now it's 50 years, uh, with training and grievance procedures that have been mandatory across most organizations, eh, in the world. And what we know from the research, astonishingly, is that after 40 years of such effort, um, the numbers haven't budged at all.
Right.
And in fact, in many ways, these kind of efforts have made the outcomes worse. In fact, so if you're a perpetrator, you're more likely to perpetrate after taking sexual harassment training. And
Hold up. If you're a perpetrator of sexual harassment and you take part in sexual harassment training, which is aimed to reduce and stop, you're more likely. Can you unpack that a bit before you go to the next step?
Yeah.
Because I think that is something that applies a lot to what we're up against in the school system, what we're up against in terms of risk navigation, getting ahead of the curve in the opiate crisis.
Yeah. And so, as a behavioral scientist yourself, that we learn by watching others. And the more we let people know that these behaviors are common, even if we know that people are doing certain behaviors, even if we know those behaviors aren't right or something we ought to be doing, we're more likely to follow suit. And so the problem with a lot of sexual harassment training programs is that they talk about how common the behavior is.
It normalizes the
It
deviance.
normalizes the deviance and fertilizes the weeds, is what we say. And so it's almost like giving permission because, well, if other people are doing it and they're in places of authority and either they're getting away with it or somehow there's some kind of reward involved with it, and it can be like an unconscious thing, the message is that I can do it too. And so it kind of activates a certain kind of behavior. And then the other one that's sort of related is that even if you're not inclined to perpetrate, but you're just like a regular person, a regular guy, taking that training makes you more likely to see such behaviors acceptable.
Right. For yourself and others, so then you don't blow the whistle if someone else is, and
right.
more likely to do yourself. Why?
Right. And so let's talk about why. And the framing of it is typically you're the problem. You, the male, it's typically the male, are the problem. And so we frame you as the villain. And when you frame someone as a problem, like, if I said to you, Chris, look, you really are, you're the problem in this whatever situation, let's call it a family dynamic or something, and you're the problem, you're going to get defensive.
This was
the
story I was being told by those around me. Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to get defensive. You may act out in different ways. You may actually be more inclined to do the thing that you're being told.
I'm a villain. I might as well be a good one. You
might as well act like one.
Yeah.
And these are not conscious things. We don't go home and write in our diary, tomorrow I'm going to, it's kind of a natural reaction. It's called reactance. And so, the opposite is, let's open the door to a different way of thinking. Let's frame these people not as villains, but as potential heroes. And this is, just imagine the psychological difference between saying you're part of the problem versus you're part of the solution. What does that look like to be part of the solution? And what does it feel like to be part of the solution? And this, I can get myself goosebumps just thinking about it, but the idea that you elevate somebody, you affirm them, you encourage them, you frame them as good people who can get better rather than bad people who need fixing. And what does that do automatically? It opens people up to new thinking. It makes them, this is called positive psychology. It makes people open to new ideas. It makes them literally, their peripheral vision expands, their brain works differently. They're more open to new ideas. They're more cooperative. They're more creative. They're more willing to reach out to others and play and be excited and curious. And so suddenly, instead of being defensive and scared or resentful, you've got people who are open and optimistic and wanting to show up differently at work.
Right.
And so what we did with this notion in the Moments Matter campaign, which was specifically to address sexual harassment in Alberta, was to talk about how little moments make a big difference in building culture. And when you have a positive culture, you're much less likely to have incidents of sexual assault or harassment. And so, what does a positive culture look like? Well, it's built one moment at a time. So, it's actually because when people think about building culture, they think, well, that's
So it's not just a
hard.
workshop for an hour and then
Right.
call it a day.
Or it's something beyond my
Yeah,
ability.
yeah.
But to show people that the way you show up, everyone who works there, how you show up and make little moments matter can make a big impact on not only reflecting culture, but building it. And so, what does that look like? Well, I often joke, it's not like you're giving a kidney to your assistant.
Yeah, you're not being a bleeding heart.
You're not.
Yeah.
It's not a big.
It's not coddling.
It's or it's not a big grand gesture. It can be something as simple as saying thank you, saying working the front lines with if you're at lunch, if you're a restaurant owner, defending someone when they make a mistake, telling them that giving somebody a second chance or making someone feel like you've got my back. These are seemingly little things that make a huge impact on people. And talking about the people and celebrating the people who are already doing that in Alberta, like let's say 80% of managers out there are really good people who really do mean well, and maybe 20% are not so good. Let's focus on the 80 and let's focus less on the 20. And what are the 80 doing? And how do we model them? And how do we celebrate them? That's the idea. And the more you can do that, the more likely you are to kind of create these organically positive workplaces where everyone can grow and thrive.
Brilliant. It made me think of that whole concept of crossing the chasm, right? And you have your early adopters, and then you have the people even before that are the bleeding edge. But it's only by way of getting from those early adopters to that mushy middle, that 50, 60%, and having them all model that you get to that 100 or 90%.
Yeah.
There's always going to be outliers. But even those who are, say, the 20%, we see it in our work all the time where it is that most troubled kid who's not coming to school, who only comes for heroes and starts to come to more classes and starts to see how math, which they were skipping all the time, now plays a role in their future outlook. And with Moments Matter, when we took part in it, what I found brilliant about it was these little intentional pieces of connecting with your coworkers and doing so not as a way to be like, oh, like I need to make sure there's no sexual harassment. It's no, I need to make sure that I'm validating others and treating them as a peer, no matter what the context is.
Yeah.
And to me, it has such a bigger ripple effect than just reducing sexual harassment in a workplace. But I think the potential there is actually to create a much more cohesive workplace where it's not just here's your strengths, work from your strengths. That's good.
Yeah.
But it's also here's how you collaborate and here's how you take these moments to really let that culture that you aspire to have bleed through the day-to-day in between times. And I found that was one of the big keys from the research that you had done, us participating in it, but also even my own observations and looking at behavioral science. How do movements happen, and how do we get these ripple effects? And if you're framing a boogeyman hypothesis, then everybody, like you said, kind of gets defensive, and those who are more likely to or already have now know the rules. Similar to the Just Say No campaigns. I've heard this from policymakers and Jordan Rempel, our program director included. I learned more about doing drugs from those campaigns than I did about not doing drugs. And it was like, just say no. This is what crack is. This is how you use it. This is how you smoke it. This is, and you now learn how to kind of navigate those deviant pieces and still left without an understanding of, okay, how am I supposed to show up if I don't want that to happen?
And more likely to try them as a result, because there's curiosity and there's a sense that my peers are doing this, and so I'm going to look weird if I don't, or like a loser. And you know what they found that actually works better is coaching kids on how to say no. And so role modeling and giving them the practice basically, and saying like, okay, you're at a party and here's a scenario. What are you going to do? And that enabled kids to stand up and actually say no. Again, I mean, sometimes you have to make a mistake, but hopefully we've learned enough by now about what doesn't work, and that these mistakes get repeated over and over and over again. Let's stop repeating them.
Yeah. And I think, like, to the core, something you say over and over is framing people as heroes, not as villains. And we're going a little bit more into that, talking about the positive emotions that can often seem out of place in a very sterile world that's all about the expectations. How does some of your research and some of your work kind of get to that core of you talk about the Pygmalion effect, that higher expectations lead to higher performance. That said, if we don't have that belief that we can achieve that expectation, it can set up either failure and reject before being rejected or that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
How do you see this framing and
Mm.
support to equip, whether it's a young person trying to say no to drugs, a workplace that's trying to have a better culture?
So I think it comes down to like how do you see the audience? And I'm afraid that some folks come at the audience again as people who need fixing, who need to be kind of forced or shamed into doing certain things differently. And I think if you really kind of like scratch the surface, you find out that people really do aspire to, they want to think well of themselves. They want to kind of show up in the world in the best way possible. And maybe sometimes we give them too much reason to doubt that they can, rather than to believe that that the opposite, that they can achieve, and we maybe don't show them the right role model. So I think a lot of it has to do with believing in people and starting from that perspective of I see you as a person who is maybe inclined and even wired to do good in the world. And I actually think that's true. I kind of think that, unless you're some kind of sociopath, you really don't want to be a jerk. And so how do we facilitate that? Well, it's kind of really understanding people at the core and like what really motivates them. So with Moments Matter, for instance, we knew that when we researched what are people thinking about, not just sexual harassment at work, but what are they thinking about work? What do they care about at work? What they care about at work was positive work cultures and leaders who walk the talk. And they wanted to see people who were ethical and credible and people of integrity and people who would actually, stand up when something needed to be done and celebrate when something good was done. That idea that you don't just frame the problem in your own narrow frame of reference, because that's about you. You need to understand the audience and what are they caring about right now, and how do you relate what they care about to the problem.
Right.
And that it's kind of that outside in, inside out approach. And so I think honestly, it just really comes down to being able to understand people, listen to them, think the best of them, and then being able to understand how to bring out the best in them using some of these strategies like behavioral science. And sometimes behavioral science is framed like really narrowly as behavioral economics, or it's the nudging idea where you're just manipulating people. And I really think like it's really about understanding the context in which people make decisions and influencing their environment in a way that helps them make better decisions.
I see so many parallels between what you just said, even the name cause and effect. We spend a lot of time as a society, as individuals, as families, as workplaces, trying to remove symptoms. Even a medical model, right? Let's suppress. You go to a pharmacy, and most of what's on sale is to stop the cough. It's to stop the fever. These are good things, especially from a medical perspective, right? But if there's actually a deeper underlying issue, and it's not just a cold, something more significant, oftentimes trying to suppress those symptoms actually leads to kind of a proliferation of the core issue.
Yeah.
From a behavioral science perspective, I even think too, is like we're not just looking at that psychological, we're looking at the sociological. So we're looking at how does this individual exist within the context of community, within the context of family, within the context of their workplace.
Yeah.
And I can't help but, kind of wonder, like, if we're chasing symptoms or we're trying to reduce those, what capacity do we have left to actually get to the root of the problem? And how do we pivot our perspective from, we want to see less homelessness, so 10-year plan to end homelessness, millions and millions of dollars spent to provide more homes, more homes, more homes. And today we have, more people living on the streets than we did, at the beginning of that campaign.
Yeah.
And more rampant drug use. So rampant drug use, opiates are dangerous, fentanyl crisis. So let's have safe injection sites. Well, what happens? We see this city after city, from Vancouver to Calgary, internationally as well. If that's all you're doing, you're not actually reducing the harm. Yes, you're saving some lives because they're not overdosing, but you're not actually doing anything to prevent that symptom from proliferating and festering.
Yeah.
So I guess the question on all of this here is like, what advice do you have for anyone who's listening, or even for Impact Society, to stay consistent in terms of looking at what's that core issue? Like ours is identity formation. So often risk becomes a life because I didn't know who I was, and I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to feel like I fit some type of mold, and this was the one that was available, all the way down to, well, I just didn't want to feel the pain anymore.
Well, I mean, if you're using that as an example, like the identity formation, there's lots of, I would probably frame it as the answer to that is to, first of all, like, what's the research that supports your proposition? Because there's plenty out there. And how do you kind of glean the social science? How do you take the social science and make it accessible for folks so that they can understand, like, that you've got a theory and a proposition and a solution based approach that is evidence based. So it's like it's there in theory, and then what you're already doing, which is you're walking it out and you're looking at it in real time. You're sort of saying, okay, we're going to apply this theory in the classroom, and we're going to watch what happens, and we're going to measure what happens. So you've got anecdotal, qualitative evidence, but you've also got quantitative evidence, which is we're going to measure pre and post. What kind of like self-concept do these folks have? What's their level of self-efficacy or agency after versus before? What concrete things have they done, like the Heroes 2 program that you've got? What concrete things can we point to kind of show evidence of action, outcomes, and behavior change? So to me, that's a really great example of one that other not-for-profits should model, which is a clear kind of not just a theoretical approach and an evidence-based approach, but real true evidence in terms of outcomes and measurement, and then maybe watching that you're not seeing any kind of negative repercussions. Like, not that you would, but there could be in some situations where maybe something happens that you don't expect, and being able to monitor and measure and report and maybe adjust as needed if you're seeing something weird that's happening that you weren't contemplating. So that's in a nutshell how I would answer that.
And it can be, prevention is hard to measure, right? Mark Twain said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, but still we struggle to get there, I think.
And that's why I think prevention isn't the real goal.
Right.
It's something else. It's like I've done other kinds of campaigns where, for instance, around family violence prevention, one of the things isn't just about awareness, but it's about, we know that one of the biggest reasons or the biggest ways to reduce future incidents is to make sure that somebody who discloses or sort of tells about what's going on gets a positive, supportive response. Okay, so the solution isn't on like telling the perpetrator not to perpetrate, and it isn't even on saying to the victim or the survivor to tell. It's to make sure that the family and friends understand what that looks like. So what are the skills that they need to support? And often they want to support. I mean, there's a sort of misunderstanding or faulty perception that most people are taboo around family violence and don't tell me because I don't want to know. Well, that's not true. Based on our research, the vast majority of people want help. They just don't know how. And so it's the confidence piece that is lacking. So if you measure confidence before and after, confidence in helping before here, now you've shown that you've made a difference. You've changed something tangible that you can theorize or you can project would turn into behavior change, because if I'm confident that I can help you, I'm more likely to say, I can help you. And so these are the things I think that people don't understand, especially the ones who build, the people who fund these, the people who produce these programs, and the people who promote these programs. And so a lot of times promotion has to do with likes and clicks and like, can you go viral? And guess what? You're going to go more viral with a very provocative, negative kind of campaign that shows graphic imagery than if you do something that has a positive spin. But the positive spin is going to be much more impactful in terms of behavior change. And I come from a place of public relations. I came from that world, marketing, PR. Promoting was everything, and eyeballs over impact. And I always say, you want eyeballs, you want impact. And we don't necessarily, oftentimes those two things are, they collide. And so we as practitioners have to be better at articulating up to the funders and to the program designers and to the program people who basically write the checks to say, we need to do this better. We need to do it differently. How we do that, I mean, I have found that people are open and persuaded by research and evidence and showing how to do it differently, but it's a matter of scale. Oftentimes there's aren't enough people who understand this, and that's the problem.
Oh, so many examples of like come to mind when you're saying all this of where I've seen it wrong before. And I think about the one of the irrefutable laws of marketing that I think most brands and most marketers want to grok on, because there's lots of them. It's a great book, but it's that have a villain, have an enemy. Mm-hmm. And so they're out there grinding and acts like we're against this, mm-hmm. and these guys are terrible. Look how bad pollution is. Look how bad drugs are. Look how bad sexual harassment is. And we go about it of we want to destroy this enemy and put a stop to it. And from what the science says and what you're saying is that actually leads to it being proliferated, not extinguished.
Part of it is because we don't want to attack let's say sexual harassment. We want to attack sexual harassers. And so we turn the perpetrators into the villains rather than the problem that we can attack kind of collectively. And again, and then we don't work back to say, how do we actually do that? And I think that's part of it, is that we've turned people into enemies as opposed to problems into enemies.
Well, and then they become check boxes, even less enemies. Now it's how many did you prevent, or how many KPIs did you score? And then I also thought when you were saying, brilliant piece there around the swing, the pendulum swing to the greenwashing. What came to mind actually was that Pepsi commercial with Kendall Jenner, where she goes into a Black Lives Matter rally and hands someone a Pepsi and everything's okay. And we saw a lot of that with the SDG movement, which is transforming now. A lot of greenwashing happened. And,
social washing.
Right, social washing, all those kinds of things. And whether it's a not-for-profit, a company, or even a government that's trying to do the best work and support their citizens, what are some common missteps that you see from organizations looking at these check boxes and these symptoms on either end of whether it's let's feel good about it, let's do more social justice perspective, or let's find that villain and let's eliminate them?
I think it comes down to just being a little too superficial in the approach. So thinking that, we're going to take a stand, or we're going to make a difference, we're going to invest in blah, 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 whatever category of investing you've got. Like, I think that people have come to the point, the research suggests that people don't believe corporations who take a stand on things. They think it's just a PR ploy. And so the ironic result is that you lose credibility when you do that, and people don't trust you. And so I think what I do recommend to folks who are in the corporate space is to figure out a way to really solve a problem in a tangible, meaningful way. And it should be related to your business. It should be something that can build your own business At the same time, it builds your community, and that's called blended value. And I was thinking about, like, for instance, a simple example is like the difference between fair trade coffee, like paying someone a fair wage for their coffee. Coffee is one thing, but if you take a blended value approach to supporting farmers, say in South America, um, not just thinking about paying them a fair wage, but also thinking about supporting, helping them with their, educate them about best practices around agriculture so their yields can grow. Uh, Building an infrastructure so that their supply chain is improved and they can access things like fertilizer and water and stuff. Um, and then maybe even the sales funnel, for instance. So doing that kind of infrastructure approach versus just a fair wage approach can can produce like a 10 times multiple in terms of somebody's wages, and it's more sustainable over time because you've actually built an infrastructure
Building capacity.
built the capacity. And that not only helps the people who are buying the coffee beans, or say, but also helps the farmers who are producing them and their families and their communities. It's so obvious. And I think businesses, maybe businesses and philanthropists too, I think they shy away from being too bold because it seems scary and it seems like maybe beyond their um, their mandate. But I think that's the problem, is like we don't have enough folks who are willing to say, I can solve this problem and I'm going to figure it out. So, like, one of my favorite examples is there's a guy in the US who ran a carpet company in the 90s.
Okay.
And carpet manufacturing is one of the most uh, pollutant kind of
Okay.
industries in the world. Lots of it. Okay. And when somebody asked him, like, what are you doing to preserve the environment? He didn't have an answer. He went back to his people and said, I want to have an answer. Like, what should we be doing? And they came up with a solution to get to net zero by 2030, 2020. I can't remember the actual time frame. I think it was 2030. And they did it. They went through a whole process of analyzing and understanding and um, doing the internal work to figure out how they can make their processes better and more environmentally friendly. And in the process, they doubled in size.
Wow.
And influenced their whole industry. And so this is an example to me of how, like, don't just talk a nice game, actually do something, stick your neck out. Like, I think that's where we're at right now. We need people who are willing to kind of stick their neck out and say, I'm doing this and I'm going to prove it.
I'm going to prove it, right? Not just signal, not just wear the pin or the bracelet or, the profile picture type of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too deep into, virtue signaling, but something that you said about values. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, this carpet company, how did he get from a place of, well, we're not doing anything about that, to we should, and we should do it in a way that actually has an effect on our customers, our vendors, and the entire ecosystem of our business?
Well, the story he tells is, his name is, I can't remember his last name now. Oh, yeah, it's Ray Anderson, and the carpet company was called,
Off the roll?
no, I don't remember the carpet company now. It's too bad. But he said, he started to do some of his own investigating. Like, what is our environmental footprint? And he said the results made him want to throw up. And so really it's about asking the question, like, what impact are we having? And Interface is the name of the company. And what impact are we having, and how do we do this better? And sometimes it's a matter of, like, for him, I think he wrote a whole book on it. He talked about his own evolution of understanding how to be a more responsible business owner and
Right.
a leader. But I think we just really have to be willing to ask those questions and take a step back and go, is what we're doing working? Is what we're doing more harm than good? And how do we do the opposite? And let's not assume. And this is the problem. Most people, too many folks will just assume that they understand the solution without actually going through the process.
Yeah. Sounds like the responsibility was one of those core values there. Like we have a responsibility beyond just our bottom line to
Mhm.
leave the world a
Mhm.
better place, one carpet at a time, per
Mhm.
se. Um, Research that's come out recently that it was a TED talk. I don't know this. I can't cite it. It doesn't come to mind, but it was a survey of about 10,000 corporate employees across North America, showing that only 2% of them had ever done personal core value work.
Hmm.
And you think about that in juxtaposition to how many people are passionate about a cause or committed to a community or a group or a movement and have a passion, have a purpose, but they've never really gone under the surface to look at their own values. What position or how does an organization or an individual take those values, say like responsibility here with Ray Anderson, and turn that into, now it's not just I need a cause to commit to and I'm going to prove it, but actually this aligns for me as an individual all the way through, kind of that through line that we began this conversation with. How do I now take that through line to make sure that what I'm doing is authentic, that what I'm doing is on purpose, that what I'm doing is not just checking a box, but it's actually addressing the underlying issue?
So I think that the answer to that is it's again that inside out, outside in approach. So let's say you're the leader of an organization and you're trying to figure out like, okay, what are our core values? I would go backward into the organization and say, what do we care about? And like collectively, it's not just I'm not going to make this up, or our board isn't, or our management team isn't going to make this up. Let's understand uh, from the perspective of employees, what drew them to this place, what makes them come to work every day, what gets them excited, what did they see makes this place different, what's valuable about it, why does their work matter, and they should be able to articulate that, and most of them are. They just have never been asked. And then take that, park it, and then go outside yourself as an organization and say, okay, now funders, customers, um, supporters in any way, what do you value about us? What's going on in the world that really concerns you? And how do we help meet those needs? And then how do those two things align? And then suddenly you're not just talking about your core values as an organization, you're talking about our core values as an ecosystem or a broader community that could include customers, it could include other kinds of like stakeholders, whatever. And to me, that's it. It's a common ground, that thing that we care about, and then it kind of creates a bit of a movement, like a sense of that we're all in this sort of grand adventure together. And that's what people want. People want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to feel like they can have an impact, and they just don't know how. And when you can show them the way and you can lead them along and give them a place, they will come to the table.
Love that. It was basically a commercial for Heroes 2. In Heroes 1, we have them doing their taproots, their core values at work. But then in Heroes 2, we actually introduce them to this question of what breaks your heart about the world?
Mhm.
And the invitation is actually now to share them with a group of your peers and work together to define one cause that you're passionate about. It could be, human trafficking, could be homelessness, could be mental health, and then to work together to do something that's data driven in your own community that can make an impact on that. So, for instance, we had a group in New Brunswick that was passionate about mental health and anxiety, especially coming out of COVID. They noticed a lot of students had heightened anxiety in the classroom and were afraid to come to school, were afraid to put up their hand. And, after a couple of years of not going outside of the house, this was a new fearful endeavor for them. And they did some research. This is an 8th grade class, so it's not peer reviewed, but I'd say empirical, asking the students, not trying to determine what the causes of anxiety were, but what are you doing when you have this anxiety? Where are you going? And they found an overwhelming number of those students were going to the washroom when they had anxiety. Well, you go to a public school bathroom typically, and you got these big beaming overhead lights and, beige walls, and it's noisy and uncomfortable, but they just needed to be alone and get some, to breathe. So they took it upon themselves to get some money from the school's budget and do a little renovation in that bathroom to paint the walls, to put quotes from the Heroes program in there, and put some calmer lighting in that space. So taking that thing that they're already doing and making it intentional, to not say, hey, we're going to get rid of anxiety. If you have anxiety, like, put your hand up. Oh boy. Nobody wants to identify themselves as someone who's anxious. But when they know that this is about supporting you and having a place to go, having someone to talk to, having an understanding that people around you also have the same issue, that you're not alone in that fear, you're not alone in the anxiety, it now creates an opportunity to not just have less anxious students or individuals, but now to create a community and a culture that says we have your back and we're in this together going forward. I think, as we kind of wrap up here, the question kind of comes back to that data-driven aspect of things. And it doesn't need to be big longitudinal research like we've taken part in over the years. But how do, from an individual standpoint, someone who's listening, who's like, they're not a researcher, they're not in behavioral science, they're just trying to do the best they can as a teacher or a parent. How would you encourage them to kind of take a data-driven and more cause-oriented approach to the problems that they might be facing?
I don't know. Like I love that example, but I kind of feel like it's about curiosity. And again, I think the problem is that people just come to the table with a preconceived notion about and an assumption about what the solutions are. And so many times I've heard from folks, we've got funding to raise awareness about blah, blah, blah. And I say the last thing you want to do is raise awareness about that thing. What you really want to do is show people how to change it. And so, like, now your grade 8 kids who did the bathroom thing, what other things can they solve? Because they asked good questions the first time, they can probably figure that out a second time. I think it's a tough one, though. I think that there needs to be a little bit of, like, yeah, being willing to maybe even acknowledge that you don't know the answer, because we live in a world where it's like, obviously it's this, and obviously, these people are the problem and they need to be fixed, and or they need to be told how to behave differently. And I think maybe it's curiosity and a little bit more humility in the process of doing some of this work, and being willing to ask good questions and maybe challenge assumptions, and being able to investigate some things like, why do these, like, where are these folks going when they feel anxious? Not so much why they feel anxious, but what do they do as a result? And so that's kind of my thinking on that.
I got one more question before we go into a bit of a rapid fire here, and wrap up. But in your work right now, or projects that you're involved in, what's the thing that you're most excited about, and how does that kind of connect that through line of your own career?
Probably it's the teaching piece, being able to, I teach online. I have my own little private course, and then I teach at university, at Ambrose University. And then I do kind of some professional development stuff internationally. That's very rewarding. I really enjoy the process of seeing the lights go on for folks, and helping them, in particular the university folks, watching them come in January and then what they leave with in April. It's a 4 month, maybe 30, 40 hours of work. They have become so proficient. And so, like, I am such a geek cheerleader in class. I'm like, this is so wonderful. I love what you're doing. This is a great idea. They're creative. They're confident. They really dissect problems. I'm just like, you guys, like, I'm sending you out into the world without knowing that you're not going to do harm.
Yeah.
And that's the key. So I guess that's the thing I get the most excited about, is teaching at the level. Yeah.
And in business is important to raise up the next generation of not just ethical leaders. We want that, but that's, again, I think, an effect of a deeper cause of more value-based and value-driven leaders in business and not-for-profit. The dandelion shirt that you're wearing today, you mentioned earlier, is a great metaphor. Maybe unpack that just a little bit in terms of what that dandelion looks like. Because there's a lot of teachers that we work with, hundreds of teachers across the country, I think, started teaching because they wanted to be that. They wanted to inspire that next generation. And sometimes it feels like they're just checking boxes.
Well, the dandelion, once it's white and it's got all these little seeds and these little like what are they like parachutes even? They just fly off and they plant themselves in other parts of the world. And so I just think about, I think like I'm very intentional about knowing that I'm here to inspire you. I think what I've come to learn as a teacher is that my job isn't so much to impart knowledge
Mhm.
as much as it is to make people confident in their own capacity,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And that has been the difference for me is like I'm here to encourage and celebrate and help you apply and build and like scaffold
Mhm.
a skill set
Yeah.
that you can then take out into the world and be productive.
Mhm.
I mean, how many folks will say to you, I went into an internship and I don't really know what to do.
Mhm.
And I don't want that. I want you to be able to walk in day one and know exactly how you can be part of a solution. You can like dissect a problem. You can take an overview and analyze what's going on in an organization and say, here's how I think we could do this better. That's my job. And I think it's about less about the curriculum and more about like giving people a vision, encouraging them, celebrating them, and making them believe in themselves.
I love that. That's the brain science of change and learning. It's not just acquiring information. We acquire information and use that in a habitual way when the feelings and the thoughts are aligned first. Feeling confident, feeling like we have the strengths, thinking about how our own personal strengths and what we're learning in this course relate to where we want to go. And then being able to implement something. I love that idea of it, like the internship. We've had lots of interns over the years at Impact Society and throughout my career. And I do my best to not just give them a catch-all generalist help with whatever you can find, but
Yeah.
what is it that you're studying? Where is it that
Yeah.
you want to go?
Yeah.
And how can you apply that here so that we can help you shape yourself into the person that you want to be? Apply what you already have for us. We're not just here to teach you. We want you to teach us. We have a brilliant young person working with us now who took a financial modeling course in the spring, just finished business school. This is his first finance job out of university, wants to be a CPA. Well, let's design your role and your projects around that thing that you're most passionate about and give you that encouragement and scaffolding. I love that term, to be able to do it in a more effective way to help us, sure, but to actually help you become more of that person that you really are underneath the surface. I got a few rapid fire questions here. A little bit about Impact Society. I know that you're well versed in our work and have really helped us get under the hood in many different ways. In terms of trust, how does trusting yourself shape a person's life or a young person's life?
When you align your behavior and your values align, then you know that you know what kind of person you are and how you show up in the world. And
Mm.
that makes a difference in terms of how you show up in the world. I think I have come to believe that that's not an easy thing to acquire. I think that oftentimes it has more to do with giving people a chance to try to develop a skill set or to become proficient at something that they go, oh, I'm good at this thing. And then I'm going to keep going with this thing. And that something about just the feedback that you get when you do a little bit of good
Yeah.
makes you go, oh, okay, I'm going to do a little bit more. And I think it's really just oftentimes it's a bit of a process of just, I don't want to say trial and error, but sometimes you don't even know what the world, what you have to offer until you just try it.
Right.
And so it's a bit of a like
Yeah.
reinforcement, positive
Heuristics too.
reinforcement. Yeah. Where just, I think the world is wired. We are all wired to kind of respond positively to folks when they do something like, uh, remarkable or something that makes us either feel good or is worthy of praise. And maybe that's why how we're built, and just figuring out what that is maybe part of how we grow up.
Next question, Joni. Heroes teaches young people how to own their story, even the tough stuff. What's the role of a story, an individual story, in a young person's life?
Well, it helps you understand obviously how yourself and how to relate to yourself, but it also helps you understand how to relate to the world. And I like that idea of like even the tough stuff because I think we can kind of like whitewash ourselves, right? And kind of make ourselves
Just
look
give them a
better.
Pepsi, it'll be fine.
Or we're gonna just show the best images of ourselves on Instagram,
Yeah.
right? And that's not real. And we know that. And so there's an element of authenticity and vulnerability and that really brings connection and like real trust between folks that makes relationships meaningful and deep.
Investing in heroes is a long-term play with immediate returns. We're shaping the culture of schools, individuals, and the future workforce. What would you say to a funder or to an organization or a government looking to provide a program like Heroes?
I would go back to that what breaks your heart
Yeah.
about young people right now. I think anybody who's maybe over a certain age, like let's say 40, 35, I don't even know, um, looks at the current generation and realizes that they've grown up in a very different environment than we did. We had a lot more autonomy, a lot more maybe opportunities for a relationship that they have, and just a kind of a less complicated world. And so, what breaks your heart, and how do you think? Like, what are the implications of that? If we did nothing, what do you think? Let's map it out. What do you think is going to happen? What's the prognosis for the world,
Mhm.
and how do we stop that? Are you interested in working with
Yeah.
us to stop that and to create a different kind of outcome?
Mm.
I know it's that why thing again, where we can go this way or that way. Which would you prefer?
Mhm. I love that. I had the pleasure of having Jody Carrington on the show a few months ago, and talked about obviously we have the opiate epidemic, we have the mental health epidemic, we have epidemics on epidemics, but her hypothesis is that it's actually that's a symptom. Those things are symptoms of a deficit of connection and a deficit of trust. And as a society, I think we see that on the news, we see that all over the place. Question I have, I guess, is knowing that, why is Hero so important right now?
It comes back to the same thing we talked about. Like if I know who I am and I'm really like comfortable in my own skin, then I'm much better able to connect with you
Mm.
and help you be comfortable in your own skin and find out like the beautiful things about you that I can celebrate and raise up and encourage. I don't know. I guess it's kind of hard to say where does it begin? Like, it can start with me knowing who I am, but it can also start with you knowing who you are and then being able to speak into me. And so I guess it comes down to that. And I think right now, the thing that surprises me the most about young folks is there is a level of cynicism that
Mhm.
is kind of like really disconcerting.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, wow, you're so young, but you're so cynical
Yeah.
about the world. And
Yeah.
maybe they just don't believe in people anymore. They don't believe in the world,
Yeah.
that the world is going to treat them fairly. And they've been kind of told that their whole lives. And so why wouldn't they? And I think part of our conversation needs to be about being the kind of people who they can trust
Mhm.
and helping them see like the 80% that's working and good as opposed to the 20% that's
Yeah.
flawed and
Trust
maybe
ourselves and
helping them
trust others.
and trust yourselves and trust others and figure out how you can be part of that.
I think that's what confidence looks like, is the
Yeah.
ability to trust yourself and trust others, to not go out there and take crazy risks, but take calculated ones that you know that you're going to grow and learn because you have the supports and the strengths. Final question: what's one thing as impact society in our heroes programs that we should be talking about more on in the public square?
Well, I guess I would focus on the outcomes and the impact and the real change that you're seeing. I mean, there are lots of folks concerned about youth development and mental health, and you're the bright light. You have a lot of great solutions, and you can prove them. So, how do you talk about those more in ways that people can digest and believe?
Yeah.
And because sometimes people are like, well, Where'd you get that evidence from? So, being able to show your outcomes, prove your process, talk about your partnerships, and the number of folks that you've
Right.
helped
Yeah.
is like 300,000 kids right now. Uh, and the growth that you're seeing, like all of that to me just speaks to confidence, and people want to be part of something that's working. So keep on that line of conversation.
Well, thank you, Joni, and it's amazing to be able to collaborate with you to meet like this, whether there's a camera on or not.